February 14, 1969. Arizona Territory, near Da Nang. The monsoon rains had grounded air support, forcing Marines to rely on ground operations alone. Through the darkness of the Vietnamese jungle, a North Vietnamese Army platoon began their river crossing, 20 to 30 soldiers moving in tight formation toward Marine positions. They believed the night belonged to them, that the darkness made them invisible, that no American could see them through the black, rain-soaked void. 50 meters away, Marine scout sniper Charles Mawhinney adjusted his M14 rifle, peering through a Starlight scope, technology the enemy didn't know existed. He could see everything, every soldier, every movement, every fatal mistake they were making. In the next 30 seconds, 16 headshots would shatter the night. 16 men would fall before the NVA even understood what was happening. One Marine, one rifle. 30 seconds. The Viet Cong would learn that in modern warfare, darkness no longer offered protection. It had become the hunter's greatest advantage. Subscribe for more untold war stories that changed history. The jungle heat never truly left, even after sunset. It simply transformed into a different kind of oppression. Thick, wet air that clung to skin and turned every breath into labor. Charles Joseph Mawhinney had learned to live with it during his months in Vietnam, the same way he'd learned to live with the constant awareness that death could arrive from any direction at any moment. On the evening of February 14, 1969, he moved through the preparations for his mission with the calm efficiency that had become second nature. Arizona Territory earned its name honestly. The region stretching south and west of Da Nang resembled the American Southwest in only one respect. It was hostile country where survival depended on vigilance and firepower. Unlike the deserts of Arizona, this territory offered dense jungle vegetation, river systems that could hide entire enemy units, and terrain that turned every patrol into a gauntlet. The 1st Battalion, 5th Marines, knew this ground intimately, had bled on it repeatedly, and defended it with a grim determination that came from understanding what failure would cost. Mawhinney checked his equipment with hands that had performed these same movements hundreds of times before. The M40 sniper rifle he typically carried remained in its case tonight. Weather had made that decision for him. The monsoon season had arrived with its usual brutality, bringing rains that turned visibility to nothing and grounded the air support that Marines depended on for survival. When the helicopters couldn't fly and the jets couldn't see their targets, the men on the ground became the only line of defense against enemy movements. Instead of his familiar M40, Mawhinney had been issued an M14 semi-automatic rifle fitted with a Starlight scope. The weapon felt different in his hands, heavier, bulkier, designed for a different kind of engagement than the precise single-shot work he usually performed. The M14 could fire at a rate of 700 rounds per minute if someone held the trigger down, though Mawhinney had no intention of doing that. Ammunition discipline separated snipers from machine gunners, and his training had been built on the foundation of one shot, one kill. The Starlight scope represented technology that still felt almost magical to men who'd grown up in an era when night operations meant fumbling in complete darkness. The device gathered ambient light from stars, moon, even the faint glow of distant flares, and amplified it through a series of photomultiplier tubes to create a greenish image of the world. It wasn't perfect. The image quality degraded in heavy rain or thick fog. The effective range maxed out around 300 meters under ideal conditions, less in the monsoon weather they faced tonight. But it transformed darkness from an impenetrable barrier into navigable terrain, and that single advantage had already saved countless American lives across Vietnam. Intelligence reports indicated that North Vietnamese Army forces were preparing to attempt a river crossing near the Marine positions. The timing made tactical sense from the enemy's perspective. Monsoon weather eliminated American air superiority. Darkness provided cover for movement. The NVA commanders likely believed they could push across the shallow river, hit the Marine positions hard, and fade back into the jungle before effective resistance could be organized. They were planning to exploit what they saw as a narrow window of opportunity. What they didn't know was that the Marines had adapted. Sniper teams like Mawhinney's existed specifically to counter enemy assumptions about what Americans could and couldn't do in the Vietnamese jungle at night. The NVA had learned to fear American artillery, American air power, American helicopters. They had not yet fully grasped that individual Marine snipers, equipped with night vision technology and positioned in carefully chosen firing positions, could devastate entire units before those units even realized they were under attack. Mawhinney settled into his position roughly 50 meters from the anticipated river crossing point. The distance put him close enough for accurate fire even in poor conditions, but far enough to avoid immediate discovery if the enemy managed to spot his muzzle flash. He'd chosen the location carefully during daylight reconnaissance, marking sight lines and calculating angles with the practiced eye of a hunter who understood that preparation determined survival. The rain continued its steady drumbeat against the jungle canopy overhead. Water dripped from leaves, collected in pools, turned the ground into sucking mud that made silent movement nearly impossible. Mawhinney adjusted his position slightly, finding the balance point where his body weight, distributed evenly, and his rifle remained stable. Comfort didn't matter. Stability mattered. Accuracy mattered. Everything else was just noise. Through the Starlight scope, the jungle took on its characteristic green glow. Shadows became shapes. Movement became trackable. The technology didn't eliminate the darkness. It simply gave him the ability to see through it in ways the enemy couldn't match. The NVA had their own night vision equipment, captured Soviet models that occasionally appeared in intelligence reports, but distribution remained limited to elite units. The average NVA soldier crossing this river tonight would be operating in complete darkness, trusting his comrades and following whispered commands. Mawhinney's breathing slowed to the rhythm he'd learned in sniper school. Controlled respiration reduced body movement, steadied the rifle, and cleared the mind for the kind of focused attention that separated successful snipers from dead ones. His finger rested alongside the trigger guard, not on the trigger itself. Discipline, control, patience. The three pillars that every instructor had hammered into every student during training. The mission parameters were clear. If NVA forces attempted the river crossing, Mawhinney was authorized to engage with maximum prejudice. No warning shots. No attempts at capture. This wasn't a patrol stumbling into an ambush. This was a deliberate enemy assault on Marine positions, and the appropriate response involved killing as many attackers as possible before they could organize and return fire. The rules of engagement in Arizona Territory had been written in American blood, and they offered no room for hesitation. He waited. The rain continued. Somewhere in the darkness, enemy soldiers were making their final preparations, checking weapons, saying prayers or thinking final thoughts before stepping into water that would either deliver them to their objective or become their grave. They didn't know about the Marine sniper watching their approach route through a scope that turned night into day. They couldn't imagine that a single American, positioned in the darkness with the right equipment and training, could halt their entire operation before it truly began. Mawhinney's thoughts remained focused on the technical aspects of the mission ahead. Wind speed, minimal in the heavy jungle. Rain reducing visibility, but not enough to eliminate engagement opportunities. Distance to target area, measured and memorized. Ammunition count, verified and rechecked. Every variable that could be controlled had been controlled. Everything else belonged to chance, weather, and the enemy's decisions about when and where to cross. The moment was coming. He could feel it in the way the jungle sounds shifted, in the subtle changes that marked human presence even when humans couldn't be seen. Years of hunting deer in Oregon forests had taught him to read those signs. Months in Vietnam had refined that skill into something sharper, more deadly, more necessary for survival. He adjusted his grip on the M14 and continued waiting, watching through the green glow of the Starlight scope for the first sign of enemy movement across the water. The first movement came at 23:47 hours, a ripple in the green-lit darkness that marked human presence against the natural flow of the jungle. Mawhinney's breathing remained steady as he tracked the shape through his Starlight scope, watching as one soldier emerged from the tree line on the far bank and paused at the water's edge. The figure stood motionless for nearly 30 seconds, scanning the opposite shore for threats that remained invisible in the rain-soaked night. Finding nothing, the soldier stepped into the water. More shapes followed. Through the amplified light of the scope, Mawhinney counted them as they emerged: 2, 5, 8, 12 soldiers, moving with the careful discipline of trained infantry, executing a tactical river crossing. They maintained spacing between individuals, each man separated by roughly 2 meters, to prevent a single burst of fire from taking out multiple targets. Their weapons remained held high to keep powder dry. The lead elements had already reached the middle of the river, water rising to waist level as they pushed forward against the current. The NVA had chosen their crossing point well. The river narrowed here, reducing exposure time during the most vulnerable phase of the operation. Dense vegetation on both banks offered concealment from observation and cover from fire once soldiers reached solid ground. Under normal circumstances, without the technology advantage Mawhinney possessed, this crossing would have succeeded. The Marines would have detected the enemy presence only after NVA forces had established positions on the near bank, turning what should have been an ambush into a close-quarters firefight that favored neither side. But these weren't normal circumstances. The Starlight scope had eliminated the enemy's primary advantage, darkness, and transformed it into a tactical liability. Every NVA soldier crossing that river appeared in Mawhinney's field of view as clearly as if they were moving in daylight. Their careful spacing, designed to minimize casualties from area weapons, actually made the sniper's job easier by giving him distinct individual targets with clear separation between them. Mawhinney watched more soldiers enter the water. The count reached 16, then 18, then 20. A full platoon, perhaps slightly under strength, but still representing significant combat power if allowed to reach the Marine positions intact. The lead elements were now 3/4 of the way across, boots finding purchase on the rising bottom as the water level decreased from waist to thigh to knee depth. In another 60 seconds, they would reach the near bank, fan out into assault formation, and begin their push toward the American lines. The tactical situation crystallized in Mawhinney's mind with the clarity that came from training and experience. He couldn't stop all of them. The math was simple and brutal. Even with the M14's semi-automatic capability, even with perfect accuracy, some enemy soldiers would survive the initial engagement and either return fire or scatter into the jungle. His mission wasn't to achieve complete annihilation. It was to break the assault, kill enough attackers to shatter their cohesion and force a retreat before they could establish a foothold. The question became one of timing and target selection. Engage too early, while most soldiers remained on the far bank, and survivors could retreat to safety and regroup for another attempt. Engage too late, after soldiers reached the near bank and dispersed into cover, and the advantage of having them concentrated in the open water would be lost. The optimal moment existed in a narrow window when maximum enemy forces had committed to the crossing but hadn't yet reached positions where they could effectively return fire or take cover. That moment was approaching. 22 soldiers now occupied the river, strung out in a rough line from the far bank to within 15 meters of the near shore. The spacing between individuals had compressed slightly as the column bunched up, navigating the deepest section of the channel. Not ideal from a tactical perspective, but acceptable given the limitations of executing a night crossing in monsoon conditions. Their training was evident in their movement, controlled, disciplined, maintaining tactical awareness, even while focused on the physical challenge of moving through waist-deep water with full combat loads. Mawhinney's finger moved from the trigger guard to the trigger itself. The M14's safety was already off, had been off since the first enemy soldier appeared at the water's edge. He settled the scope's reticle on the lead soldier, now less than 10 meters from reaching the near bank. Distance to target, approximately 50 meters from Mawhinney's position, slightly less to the soldiers still in mid-channel. Well within the effective range of the M14, which could deliver accurate fire out to 460 meters under ideal conditions. These weren't ideal conditions, but 50 meters in the rain represented a range where even degraded visibility wouldn't significantly impact accuracy. The lead soldier took another step forward, water now below knee level. His weapon came down from the high carry position as he prepared to transition from crossing mode to assault mode. Behind him, the rest of the platoon continued their steady advance, each man focused on his own footing, his own section of river, his own role in the operation unfolding exactly as their commanders had planned. They had no idea they were being watched, no concept that American technology had stripped away the protective darkness they relied upon, no warning that their careful approach had been observed, measured, and calculated by a Marine sniper who had already decided which of them would die first and in what order the killing would proceed. Mawhinney's breathing slowed to the pause between heartbeats. His body had gone still, every muscle aligned to support the rifle and absorb the recoil that would come with each shot. The scope's reticle remained centered on the lead soldier's head, tracking the slight bobbing movement that came with wading through water. Not a difficult shot under the circumstances. Stationary firing position, stable platform, target moving in a predictable pattern at close range. The kind of engagement that Marine sniper instructors would classify as routine, almost mechanical in its execution. But there was nothing routine about what was about to happen. 22 enemy soldiers had committed to a river crossing that would never be completed. In the next 30 seconds, 16 of them would die, shot down with precision that would seem impossible to anyone who didn't understand the combination of training, technology, and tactical positioning that made such killing feasible. The survivors would carry stories back to their units about the night they crossed a river and walked into slaughter, about an enemy who could see in darkness and kill with supernatural accuracy. Those stories would spread through NVA ranks, becoming part of the mythology that surrounded American snipers, feared figures who struck without warning and disappeared without trace. The psychological impact would ripple outward from this single engagement, affecting enemy planning and morale in ways that far exceeded the tactical significance of stopping one platoon-sized river crossing. But that was future analysis, the kind of strategic assessment that would appear in after-action reports and intelligence summaries. Right now, in this moment, the situation reduced to its essential elements: target, range, wind, trigger press. The fundamentals of marksmanship that every Marine learned in basic training, refined and perfected through the specialized instruction that transformed ordinary riflemen into scout snipers. The lead soldier reached the near bank, water streaming from his uniform as he stepped onto solid ground. Behind him, the river held 21 more targets, arranged in a column that stretched back across 50 meters of open water. Mawhinney's finger took up the slack in the trigger, applying the steady rearward pressure that would break the shot and begin the engagement. No hesitation, no second thoughts, just the calm execution of a mission that had been thoroughly planned and carefully prepared. The moment had arrived, and with it came the cold mathematics of combat. 1 Marine, 1 rifle, 30 seconds. The river crossing was about to end in a way the NVA platoon commander had never imagined possible. The M14's report cracked through the jungle darkness, a sharp sound that cut through the steady hiss of rain against vegetation. The lead soldier dropped instantly, killed before his brain could process the information that he'd been shot. Through the Starlight scope, Mawhinney watched the body collapse into the shallow water at the river's edge, already transitioning to his second target before the first had finished falling. The semi-automatic action of the M14 cycled smoothly, ejecting the spent cartridge and chambering a fresh 7.62mm NATO round in a fraction of a second. No manual bolt manipulation required, no interruption in the firing sequence. Mawhinney's training had prepared him for this kind of rapid engagement. The muscle memory developed through thousands of practice rounds, allowing his hands to manage recoil and realign the rifle without conscious thought. His focus remained locked on the scope picture, tracking targets and calculating adjustments with the speed that separated expert marksmen from merely competent ones. The second soldier died 3 seconds after the first, caught mid-stride in waist-deep water with no cover available and no time to react. The third fell 2 seconds later, the realization that they were under attack just beginning to register among the NVA soldiers still standing. Panic hadn't set in yet. These were trained infantry who'd survived previous combat. but confusion spread through the column as men tried to identify the threat's location while simultaneously seeking cover that didn't exist in the middle of an open river. Mawhinney fired again. The fourth soldier went down, then the fifth, each shot a calculated execution timed to the rhythm of trigger press, recoil absorption, target acquisition, and follow-through. The M14's effective rate of fire in semi-automatic mode allowed for roughly 40 aimed shots per minute under ideal conditions. These weren't ideal conditions, but Mawhinney wasn't firing at maximum rate. He was firing at the optimal rate that balanced speed with accuracy, each trigger press the result of a complete sight picture and proper breathing control. The sixth soldier fell at 9 seconds into the engagement. The seventh went down at 11 seconds, caught trying to wade toward the near bank in a desperate attempt to reach cover. The NVA platoon's tactical discipline was beginning to fracture as survival instinct overrode training. Some soldiers attempted to return fire, spraying AK-47 rounds in the general direction they thought the shooting originated from. Their bullets impacted jungle vegetation 20 meters to Mawhinney's left, the muzzle flash from his M14 having created an optical illusion in the darkness that misled enemy soldiers about his actual position. The incoming fire represented minimal threat under the circumstances. The NVA soldiers were shooting blind, unable to see their target and reduced to area suppression in hopes of forcing the sniper to keep his head down. But Mawhinney had no intention of ducking. His position offered solid cover from the front, and the enemy's wild shooting only accelerated their own deaths by revealing which soldiers still posed active threats versus which were simply trying to survive. Target 8 died at 14 seconds, followed immediately by Target 9 at 16 seconds. The precision remained constant despite the increasing chaos in the river. Each shot found its mark with the mechanical consistency that came from perfect repetition of fundamentals: sight picture, breathing, trigger control, follow-through. The 4 pillars of marksmanship applied with lethal efficiency against targets who'd made the fatal mistake of silhouetting themselves in open water against an enemy who could see in darkness. The 10th soldier fell at 18 seconds into the engagement, then the 11th at 20 seconds. More than half the NVA platoon was dead or dying, their bodies floating in the current or sprawled on the riverbank where they'd collapsed. The survivors had begun attempting retreat, turning back toward the far bank in a desperate scramble to escape the kill zone they'd walked into. But turning their backs only made Mawhinney's job easier. Running targets moving away presented larger silhouettes and more predictable movement patterns than soldiers trying to advance while maintaining tactical awareness. The 12th soldier went down at 22 seconds, shot in the back of the head while trying to wade through thigh-deep water toward the far bank. The 13th fell at 24 seconds, the 14th at 26 seconds. The engagement had taken on a mechanical quality, each shot blending into the next in a continuous sequence of target acquisition and elimination. Mawhinney's hands worked the rifle with practiced efficiency. His breathing remained controlled. His focus never wavered from the scope picture that showed enemy soldiers dying with each trigger press. Target 15 died at 28 seconds, caught in mid-channel with nowhere to hide and no hope of reaching safety before the next round found him. The 16th and final kill came at 29 seconds, a soldier who'd made it almost back to the far bank before Mawhinney's bullet ended his retreat permanently. Then silence fell across the river, broken only by the rain and the fading echoes of gunfire rolling through the jungle. 16 headshots in 29 seconds. 16 enemy soldiers killed with 16 rounds of 7.62mm ammunition. A kill ratio that would seem impossible to anyone unfamiliar with the combination of factors that had made it achievable: advanced night vision technology, optimal tactical positioning, enemy forces concentrated in an open kill zone with no cover available, and a Marine sniper trained to exploit exactly these kinds of opportunities. The surviving NVA soldiers had vanished into the jungle on the far bank, their assault broken and their unit combat effectiveness destroyed. 6 men remained alive from a SAR platoon that had numbered 22 when the crossing began. Those 6 would carry news of what happened back to their commanders, describing an engagement that defied their understanding of how Americans fought at night. The story would spread, each retelling adding layers of fear and uncertainty about what Marine snipers could do in darkness. Mawhinney swept the river one more time through his Starlight scope, confirming no additional threats remained in his field of view. Bodies floated in the current, some drifting downstream, while others had caught on rocks or submerged logs. The water ran dark even through the scope's amplified image, blood mixing with rain and river water in patterns that would have seemed abstract if they weren't evidence of men who'd been alive 60 seconds earlier. The realization of what he'd accomplished hadn't fully registered yet. That would come later, in the quiet moments when the adrenaline faded and his mind processed the events with the clarity that only distance could provide. Right now, his focus remained on tactical considerations, ammunition expenditure, possible enemy reinforcements, the need to report engagement results to his command. 16 confirmed kills represented significant tactical success, but it also meant 16 NVA soldiers whose comrades might seek revenge, or whose commanders might adjust their operational plans to account for American night vision capabilities. Mawhinney conducted a functions check on his M14, ensuring the weapon remained operational in case additional targets appeared. The rifle had performed flawlessly throughout the engagement, no malfunctions or feeding issues, despite the rapid firing sequence and the humid conditions that could cause problems with less reliable weapons. The Starlight scope remained functional, its greenish display still showing the river and the far bank with sufficient clarity to detect movement if enemy forces attempted another crossing. No movement appeared. The jungle had gone quiet in the way it always did after violent contact, as if the natural world needed time to process the intrusion of human warfare into its domain. Mawhinney remained in position, watching and waiting, professional discipline overriding any temptation to relax or assume the threat had passed. Ambushes sometimes came in waves, with follow-on forces exploiting the defender's assumption that a single repulsed attack meant the fighting was over. But no follow-on attack materialized. The NVA had learned their lesson the hard way, paid the price for underestimating American technological advantages and tactical preparation. 16 dead soldiers in 30 seconds had delivered a message more powerful than any propaganda broadcast or psychological operation leaflet. The river crossing was finished, the assault broken, and the night belonged once again to the Marine sniper who demonstrated what precision marksmanship could accomplish when applied with perfect timing, against an enemy caught in the open with nowhere to hide. The word spread through NVA ranks with the speed that only terror could generate. By dawn on February 15th, commanders 3 kilometers from the failed river crossing had heard multiple versions of what happened in the darkness, each account more frightening than the last. Some survivors claimed the Americans had deployed a new weapon that could see through solid darkness. Others insisted an entire squad of snipers had opened fire simultaneously, creating the illusion of impossible accuracy from a single position. A few whispered that the Marine responsible wasn't human at all, but some kind of spirit that hunted in the night. The truth was simultaneously more mundane and more terrifying than any of the rumors. One Marine with one rifle and one technological advantage had destroyed a platoon-strength assault in less than 30 seconds. The implications rippled outward from that single engagement, affecting tactical planning and operational decisions across the entire region. NVA commanders who'd grown comfortable with their ability to move forces under cover of darkness now faced the realization that American night vision capabilities had eliminated their primary advantage. Intelligence officers on both sides would later recognize this engagement as representative of a broader shift in the nature of jungle warfare. The NVA had spent years perfecting tactics designed to exploit American weaknesses, avoiding daylight movement to negate air superiority, using terrain to nullify advantages in artillery and armor, striking at night when US forces struggled with visibility and coordination. Those tactics had worked because they exploited genuine gaps in American capabilities, but technology was closing those gaps faster than enemy commanders could adapt their operational doctrine. The Starlight scope represented just one element of this technological transformation. American forces had also deployed infrared detection systems, ground surveillance radar, acoustic sensors that could identify enemy movement patterns, and chemical detection equipment that could track soldiers through jungle terrain by sensing their presence. Each system had limitations. None worked perfectly in all conditions, and all required trained operators who understood both the capabilities and the constraints of their equipment. But collectively, these technologies were rewriting the rules of engagement in ways that favored American tactical approaches. For the NVA soldiers who survived the river crossing, the immediate concern wasn't strategic analysis or technological trends. It was processing the trauma of watching their comrades die in rapid succession without being able to identify the threat or mount effective resistance. Combat veterans understood that death came suddenly in war, but this had been different. The killing had possessed a mechanical quality that stripped away any sense of being engaged in human conflict. It felt like being hunted by something that operated on a different level of reality, something that could see them when they couldn't see it, something that killed with a precision that seemed impossible under the circumstances. The psychological impact couldn't be quantified in after-action reports or measured by body counts, but it was real, and it was devastating. NVA platoons that had previously operated with aggressive confidence now approached river crossings with extreme caution, sometimes refusing to attempt them at night, even when tactical situations demanded speed over security. Unit cohesion suffered as soldiers questioned whether their training and equipment could protect them against enemies who possessed such overwhelming technological advantages. Morale declined as stories spread about Marines who could kill in complete darkness from positions that remained undetectable. Some of this psychological warfare was intentional. American intelligence officers recognized the value of enemy fear and worked to amplify it through carefully managed information operations. Leaflets dropped over NVA-controlled areas described American night vision capabilities in exaggerated terms, suggesting U.S. forces could see enemy soldiers through solid vegetation and track them across kilometers of jungle terrain. Radio broadcasts warned that darkness no longer offered protection, that Marine snipers owned the night, that attempting to move under cover of darkness meant walking into ambushes that couldn't be predicted or avoided. But much of the psychological impact emerged organically from soldiers sharing their experiences with comrades. The survivors of Mawhinney's ambush didn't need American propaganda to convince them that night operations had become exponentially more dangerous. They'd lived through the engagement, watched friends die, felt the helplessness of being targeted by an enemy they couldn't locate or engage. Those first-hand accounts carried more weight than any leaflet or radio broadcast could achieve. NVA commanders faced a strategic dilemma with no clear solution. They couldn't abandon night operations entirely. Daylight movement invited immediate destruction from American air power and artillery. But continuing night operations against an enemy with superior night vision technology meant accepting casualties that would slowly bleed their units down to combat ineffectiveness. Some units attempted to split the difference, moving during twilight hours when visibility favored neither side equally. Others tried to acquire Soviet night vision equipment through supply channels that were already stretched thin, supporting operations across South Vietnam. The failed river crossing had demonstrated another uncomfortable reality about the changing nature of the war. Individual American soldiers, properly equipped and positioned, could now achieve tactical effects that previously required platoon or company-level operations. One Marine, sniper with a Starlight scope, had stopped an assault that would have normally required defensive fires from multiple machine gun positions supported by mortars and artillery. The force multiplication achieved through technology meant that U.S. units could hold larger areas with fewer soldiers, concentrate forces more effectively, and respond to threats with greater flexibility. This realization forced NVA planners to reconsider assumptions that had guided their operational approach since the early days of American involvement. The conventional wisdom held that superior numbers and intimate knowledge of local terrain would eventually overcome American advantages in firepower and mobility. But if individual American soldiers could achieve such disproportionate effects through technological superiority, then the calculus of attrition warfare shifted dramatically. The NVA would need to kill far more Americans than initially projected to achieve their strategic objectives, and those additional casualties would come at correspondingly higher costs to their own forces. The engagement near Da Nang on February 14th didn't change the war's ultimate outcome. That would be determined by political decisions made in Washington and Hanoi, not by tactical successes in the Vietnamese jungle. But it did illustrate how technology was reshaping the immediate tactical reality that soldiers on both sides confronted daily. The NVA couldn't ignore the lesson, couldn't pretend that darkness still offered the same protection it had provided in previous years. American night vision capabilities had matured from experimental systems with limited distribution to standard equipment that scout snipers carried on routine operations. For Mawhinney, the engagement brought recognition from his superiors and respect from his fellow Marines, though he remained characteristically modest about what he'd accomplished. The official after-action report documented 16 confirmed kills achieved in approximately 30 seconds of engagement, a kill rate that exceeded anything in Marine Corps sniper records up to that point. But the report couldn't capture the broader significance of what had happened, the way a single well-executed ambush had contributed to the growing sense among NVA forces that American technological superiority was shifting the tactical balance in ways that couldn't be overcome through courage or tactical skill alone. The survivors who'd escaped back across the river carried that message with them, spreading it through informal communication networks that moved faster than official intelligence channels. Within days, NVA units across the region had heard some version of what happened when a platoon attempted a river crossing near Da Nang. The details varied with each retelling, but the core message remained consistent. The Americans could see in darkness, they could kill with impossible precision, and attempting to exploit nighttime conditions no longer guaranteed safety from their technology and training. That fear, more than any individual tactical success, represented the true impact of Mawhinney's 30 seconds of controlled violence. The river crossing had been stopped, 16 enemy soldiers had been killed, and an entire operational approach had been called into question by forces that were learning to adapt faster than their opponents could compensate. Dawn broke over Arizona territory with the gradual transformation from complete darkness to grey light that characterized tropical mornings after heavy rain. The monsoon had passed during the early hours, leaving behind saturated vegetation and mud that would make movement difficult until the sun had time to work its drying magic on the landscape. Mawhinney remained in position through the night, maintaining watch over the river crossing in case NVA forces attempted a follow-up assault. No such attempt materialized. The enemy had learned their lesson and withdrawn to regroup. When full daylight arrived, a Marine patrol moved forward to conduct battle damage assessment and recover any intelligence materials from the bodies scattered along the riverbank and floating in the water. The patrol leader, a staff sergeant with 2 tours under his belt, counted 16 NVA soldiers killed in action, each one shot through the head with the kind of precision that seemed almost surgical in its execution. He'd seen plenty of combat deaths during his time in Vietnam, but this engagement stood apart. There was no spray of bullets across multiple targets, no evidence of panic fire or ammunition waste. Just 16 dead men and 16 expended cartridge cases recovered from Mawhinney's firing position. The official after-action report documented the engagement in the clinical language that military bureaucracy preferred. Date, time, location, friendly forces involved, enemy forces engaged, casualties on both sides, ammunition expended, tactical outcome. The numbers told part of the story: 1 Marine sniper, 16 confirmed enemy kills, 0 friendly casualties, mission success. But numbers couldn't capture the broader implications of what had occurred in those 30 seconds of controlled violence. Lieutenant Colonel Arthur Lucier reviewed the report with the kind of careful attention he gave to all significant tactical engagements under his command. The 1st Battalion, 5th Marines had been operating in this region long enough for him to understand the strategic value of the terrain and the constant pressure NVA forces applied against Marine positions. Every successful defense mattered. Every enemy assault that was repulsed represented a small victory in the larger war of attrition that characterized American operations in Vietnam. But this engagement stood out for reasons that transcended simple body counts. Lussier recognized what many officers in Vietnam were beginning to understand, that technology was fundamentally altering the tactical equation in ways that would reshape how future wars were fought. The Starlight scope wasn't just a piece of equipment that helped soldiers see in darkness. It was a force multiplier that allowed individual Marines to achieve effects that previously required coordinated actions by entire units. One sniper with night vision capability could now accomplish what used to take a machine gun squad, a mortar team, and supporting artillery to achieve. The implications extended beyond immediate tactical success. If one properly equipped and positioned Marine could stop a platoon-sized assault, then force structure assumptions needed to be reconsidered. Defensive positions could be held with fewer soldiers, patrol sizes could be reduced, resources could be concentrated more effectively. The entire operational approach to jungle warfare was evolving in real time as new technologies demonstrated capabilities that hadn't existed when current doctrine was written. Mawhinney himself processed the engagement with the quiet professionalism that characterized his approach to his role as a scout sniper. He filed his report, cleaned and inspected his weapon, and resumed his normal duties without seeking recognition or dwelling on what he'd accomplished. The killing didn't haunt him the way it haunted some soldiers. He'd made peace with the moral dimensions of his job before he ever arrived in Vietnam. His targets were enemy combatants engaged in armed assault against Marine positions. The rules of engagement were clear, his actions were authorized, and the tactical necessity was obvious. But he understood that something significant had occurred during those 30 seconds at the river crossing. Not just in terms of enemy casualties or tactical success, but in terms of what the engagement represented about the changing nature of warfare. His father had fought in World War II with weapons and tactics that would have been recognizable to soldiers from World War I. The fundamentals hadn't changed much. Riflemen still fired rifles, machine gunners still laid down suppressive fire, artillery still provided indirect support. The technology had improved incrementally, but the basic approach to ground combat remained consistent across decades. Vietnam was different. The pace of technological change had accelerated to the point where fundamental assumptions about how infantry operated were being overturned within a single deployment cycle. Night vision equipment, helicopter mobility, radio communications that worked reliably in jungle terrain. These weren't incremental improvements to existing capabilities. They were transformational technologies that enabled entirely new tactical approaches. And Mawhinney had just demonstrated one of those new approaches with lethal efficiency. The story of the river crossing engagement spread through Marine units across I Corps, passed along through informal communication channels that moved faster than official reports. Marines who heard the account understood its significance immediately. The fear that had always accompanied night operations, the vulnerability that came with operating in darkness against an enemy who knew the terrain intimately, had been inverted. Now it was the enemy who feared darkness, who understood that Marine snipers could see them when they couldn't see back, who recognized that attempting to exploit nighttime conditions might mean walking into ambushes they couldn't predict or avoid. This psychological shift mattered more than most commanders initially recognized. Wars weren't won solely through superior firepower or favorable kill ratios. They were won when one side's will to continue fighting eroded faster than the others. The engagement at the river crossing contributed to that erosion by demonstrating that NVA tactical advantages were being systematically eliminated through American technological superiority. The jungle terrain that was supposed to favor guerrilla warfare? American helicopters negated that advantage. The darkness that was supposed to provide cover for movement? Night vision equipment eliminated that protection. The numerical superiority that was supposed to overwhelm American positions? Precision weapons allowed smaller forces to achieve disproportionate effects. None of this meant the war would end quickly, or that American victory was inevitable. Strategic success required more than tactical superiority, and the political dimensions of the conflict would ultimately matter more than any engagement in Arizona territory. But tactical success created space for strategic options, and engagements like the one Mawhinney had executed demonstrated that American forces could adapt and innovate faster than their opponents could compensate. The 16 NVA soldiers killed at the river crossing became part of the statistical record that measured progress in Vietnam. Body counts that were tallied, reported up the chain of command, and analyzed by planners trying to assess whether attrition warfare was achieving its strategic objectives. But they also became part of a different kind of record, an oral history passed among soldiers about the night when one Marine sniper demonstrated what technology and training could accomplish when applied with perfect timing against an enemy caught in the open with nowhere to hide. Years later, military historians would study this engagement as an example of how technological advantages could create asymmetric tactical outcomes in counterinsurgency operations. The engagement would appear in training materials used to educate new generations of snipers about the importance of positioning, patience, and making full use of available equipment. The Starlight scope that made the engagement possible would evolve into more sophisticated night vision systems that became standard equipment across the entire military. But in February of 1969, none of that future analysis mattered. What mattered was that a planned NVA assault had been stopped, Marine positions had been successfully defended, and 16 enemy soldiers who'd attempted to cross a river under cover of darkness would never threaten American forces again. The engagement lasted 30 seconds. Its impact would resonate for years, shaping how both sides approached night operations and contributing to the growing recognition that technological superiority was reshaping ground combat in ways that couldn't be ignored or overcome through traditional tactical approaches. In the silence of the jungle, where monsoon rains had given way to humid sunshine, the river continued flowing past the bank where 16 men had died. The water showed no permanent mark of what had occurred there, no lasting evidence of the moment when precision marksmanship and advanced technology had combined to create tactical effects that seemed impossible under the circumstances. But the soldiers on both sides who'd witnessed or heard about that night's events understood that something fundamental had changed in how wars would be fought, and that change had been written in 30 seconds of controlled violence that stopped an assault before it could truly begin.